The night my daughter-in-law showed up at my back door, I was standing at the kitchen counter sorting through a box of my late husband's fishing lures. That is what I do when I cannot sleep. I do not know why. I am not a fisherman, and neither were my children. But Jean was, and sometimes at 2 in the morning, I just need to hold something that he held. The lures are organized by color now in a tackle box on the shelf above the dryer. I know where every single one of them is. I heard the knock, and I thought it was the wind. We get a particular kind of wind off the ridge in late October that catches the screen door and rattles it in a way that sounds almost intentional. I stood still and listened. It came again. 3 knocks, soft and close together, like someone who was not sure they had the right to be there. I opened the door, and my daughter-in-law was standing on the steps in the dark with no coat on. She is from Georgia originally, and she has never fully adjusted to upstate New York winters. Never mind that she has lived here for 6 years. She is always cold. She always has a coat. She did not have one now. She was holding her left arm against her body at a strange angle, the way you hold something broken to keep it still. Her hair was wet from the rain. There was a cut above her eyebrow. Not deep, but the kind that bleeds more than it should. And it had run down the side of her face and dried there. She looked at me and she said, "Nan," that is what she calls me. Not my name, not my title, just Nan. The way she said it the first Christmas she spent with us when my son brought her home, and she fit into our kitchen like she had always been there, standing next to me at the stove asking questions about how I made the gravy. I had to pretend I needed something from the refrigerator because I did not want her to see how much that one word had done to me. I got her inside. I reached for the phone and she put her hand over mine. "Please," she said, "just let me tell you first." I sat her down at the kitchen table. I turned on the light over the sink instead of the overhead because the overhead is harsh, and she looked like someone who needed something gentle. I got a cloth and some ice, and I sat across from her and I listened. Her name is Petra. She is 34 years old. She teaches 3rd grade at the elementary school 2 towns over, and she has a gift for it. That particular kind of patience that is not passive but active. Intentional. The kind that holds space for a child who is not ready yet without making the child feel the weight of the weight. She's been married to my son for 3 years. His name is Finn. He is 37. He was at a conference in Albany that weekend, a 2-day thing for the firm he works for, and he had been gone since Friday morning. She told me that she had been home alone all day Saturday. She had been grading papers and watching something on television and eating soup for dinner because that is what she does when Finn is away. Soup and something she has already seen before, so she does not have to pay full attention. Around 7 in the evening, there had been a knock at the front door. It was my other son's wife. Her name is Deanna. She is 44 years old and she has been married to my older son for 11 years. And I want to be honest about this, because I think honesty is the only thing that serves anyone now. I had seen it. I had seen things for a long time, and I had told myself what people tell themselves, that she was difficult but not cruel, that she had her reasons. That time would smooth it. I had been wrong and I had let myself be wrong, because being right would have required me to act, and acting would have required me to hurt someone I loved. And instead I smoothed and I bit my tongue and I waited for something to change on its own. It did not change on its own. Deanna had come to the door with a bakery box. She had said she was in the area and had thought of Petra and had wanted to check in. She had said things had been tense between them and she was sorry for her part in it, and she wanted to start over. Petra told me that she had felt something lift when she heard that. She told me she knew it might be too good to be true, but she had wanted so badly for it to be true that she had let herself believe it a little. She let Deanna in. They sat in the living room. Deanna set the bakery box on the coffee table and opened it, and it was from the French place in town, the good one, the one Petra had mentioned to her once in passing at a family dinner 18 months ago. She had remembered. That, Petra told me, was what made her trust it. Someone who remembered that detail after 18 months was someone who was paying attention, and people who were paying attention could change. They talked for almost an hour. Deanna talked about the family and about how she had felt like an outsider herself when she first married in, and how hard the first years had been. Petra said she found herself nodding. She said she felt seen in a way she had not felt in a long time inside this family. Then something shifted. Deanna reached into the bakery box and took out one of the pastries, and she set it on the napkin, and she said, very calmly, very pleasantly, "You know that Finn's family has been worried about the two of you for a while now." Petra said she asked what she meant. Deanna said that people in the family had questions about whether Finn was happy, about whether Petra had really settled into the life here, or whether she was always going to be somewhere else in her head, somewhere back in Georgia. She said it in that particular voice some people have, the one that wraps an attack in the language of concern, that makes the thing being said sound like it is coming from a place of caring rather than from wherever it is actually coming from. Petra said she told her that she was happy here. She said she had built her life here. She said she loved Finn and she loved this family. Deanna looked at her for a moment, and then she said, "Does Finn know about the miscarriage you had before you met him?" Petra went very still. She had not talked about that with Finn's family. She had talked about it with Finn. That was between them, private, settled. A part of her history that she had shared with her husband in the way you share things with the person you have chosen. She did not know how Deanna knew. She still does not know for certain, though she has her suspicions. A conversation years ago at a bachelorette weekend with a woman who knew someone, the way things travel in small constellations of people who have too many connections. Petra said she stood up. She said she asked Deanna to leave. Deanna did not leave. She said she was not done. She said that she thought Petra should know that there were things people were not saying to her face that were being said everywhere else, and that she was only telling her because someone should. Petra walked toward the front door and opened it. Deanna followed her, and as she passed her in the doorway, she said something that Petra repeated to me slowly, word by word, sitting at my kitchen table with the ice wrapped in a cloth pressed to the side of her face. She said, "You came into this family with nothing. You brought nothing with you. And when Finn finally figures that out, you will leave with nothing. And whatever you think you are building here, you are building on someone else's foundation, and one day they will take it back." Petra told her to get out. Deanna did not get out immediately. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and then she put her hand on the door frame, and she pushed off it, and the door swung hard, and the edge of it caught Petra across the side of the face, where the cut was now dried in a dark line. And Petra stumbled back into the side table in the entryway, and the lamp on it went over, and she went down with it, and her arm went out to catch herself on the floor, and something in her wrist bent in the direction it was not meant to go. Deanna walked out. She pulled the door shut behind her. Petra heard her car start. Petra lay on the floor for a while. Her phone was across the room on the couch. She got to it eventually. She thought about calling Finn, and she thought about what would happen if she did, what his voice would sound like, how he would leave the conference immediately and drive 3 hours in the dark, and what that would do to him before he even arrived. And she thought about the family and what this would start and what it would become. And she thought about all of the times over the past 3 years that something smaller had happened, and she had swallowed it and moved on because it was easier and because she had wanted to be the kind of person who could weather difficulty with grace. She had spent 3 years being graceful. She was tired. She drove herself to my house instead. I called an ambulance. She did not stop me this time. I rode with her to the hospital, and I sat in a waiting room with plastic chairs and a television mounted too high on the wall, playing a news program with the sound off, and I sat there for an hour and 40 minutes, and I thought very carefully about what I was going to do. My older son, Deanna's husband, his name is Boyd. He is 43 years old. He is a good man in the way that some good men are good, which is to say he is good when goodness is easy, and he is much less good when goodness is easy, and he is much less good when goodness costs him something. He loves his wife. He has made choices in service of keeping his wife happy, that I have watched and said nothing about. And I'm not proud of that. This was going to come to him, and it was going to cost him, and I was sorry for that. But I was not going to protect him from it at Petra's expense. I had already protected too many people from too many things for too long. I did not call Boyd. I called my sister. Her name is Vivienne. She is 69 years old. She retired 4 years ago from a career that had taken her from legal aid to private practice, for the last 12 years of her working life, a position as a senior investigator for the State Attorney General's office. She now tends a very serious vegetable garden and volunteers 2 days a week at the library and plays bridge on Thursday evenings and is the most precise, unruffled human being I have ever known. Our mother used to say that Vivienne had been born without the gene for panic, that she came into the world calm and had simply stayed that way. I told her what had happened. I told her the way she had always taught me to tell things, starting at the beginning and moving forward without gaps and without interpretation, just the sequence of events in the order they occurred. When I finished, there was a silence. She said, "Is Petra willing to make a statement?" I said I did not know yet. I said I had not asked her. She said, "Good. Don't ask her tonight. Let her sleep. Ask her in the morning when she has had time to be somewhere safe." She said, "Is there anything physical, documentation?" I said the hospital was documenting the wrist and the cut. She said, "Good. That is the most important thing right now." She said, "I need you to do something for me. I need you not to call Boyd tonight, not Deanna. No one in that part of the family. Not until I have had a chance to make some calls." I asked her what she was going to do. She said, "What I always do." I knew what that meant. Our mother had raised us with a particular understanding of how the world worked, not cynical but clear-eyed. And she had told us more than once that the worst thing you could do when someone wronged you was to react immediately, because an immediate reaction gave the other person the chance to shape the story before you could. She said the truth had its own weight, but weight needed time to settle. She said patience was not passivity. She said the difference between the two was the difference between a woman who forgave everything and a woman who forgave nothing, and that neither of those women was the one you wanted to be. Vivienne called me at 6:45 the next morning. I was still at the hospital, in the same chair, with a cup of coffee from the machine down the hall that tasted like it had been brewed sometime earlier in the week. She had spent the night making phone calls. She had called a former colleague who had moved into family law. She had called a woman she knew who had spent 20 years in the district attorney's office in our county before retiring. She had called a man she had worked with, who now did civil litigation, and had, she said, a particular interest in cases involving documented patterns of harassment within family systems. She told me that what Deanna had done the previous evening was not simply a family dispute. An individual who had entered a private residence under false pretenses and in the course of that visit inflicted physical injury on the occupant had committed something that had a name and a set of legal consequences. The injury to the wrist, documented at the hospital, was evidence. The cut above the eyebrow, documented at the hospital, was evidence. The sequence of events leading up to that evening, if Petra could describe them, and if others could corroborate them, was also evidence. She had also made a different kind of call. She had reached out to a woman in the neighborhood where Deanna and Boyd lived, a woman she had known for many years through a community organization they had both been involved with. This woman, without knowing anything about the previous evening, had mentioned in passing that there had been some tension on the street lately, that a neighbor 2 doors down had called the non-emergency police line in September about an argument that had gotten loud between the couple. That was the kind of detail that, Vivienne told me, had a way of mattering later. She said, "There is something else." She said she had asked her civil litigation colleague a question, not just about the previous night, but about the broader pattern. She had asked him about the past 3 years. She had asked him what kind of picture emerged if you laid out, in sequence, the things Petra had experienced inside this family. She said, "I talked to Finn this morning. I had not known she was going to do that. I had not asked her to. She had done it because she had a clearer head than I did, And she had recognized that Finn needed to hear this before he drove home, not after, so that whatever he did when he arrived, he did with full information and not as a reaction to shock. She said Finn had been quiet for a long time, and then he had said, "I have been making excuses for a long time." Vivienne said, "Yes, and now you stop." He arrived at the hospital 2 hours later. He had driven from Albany in the dark on a Sunday morning, and he walked through the doors, and he went straight to Petra's room, and I sat in the hallway, and I did not follow him. After about 30 minutes, he came back out and sat next to me, and he did not say anything for a while. He just sat there with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped between them, and I let him have the silence because some things need a minute before they become words. Finally, he said, "How bad is the wrist?" I said a small fracture. They were talking about a soft cast. He said, "And the baby?" I looked at him. He said, "She told me. Just now. She said she had not wanted to tell anyone yet, that they were only 8 weeks, and she had been afraid to say it out loud in case something went wrong, and then something went wrong, and she was afraid to say it out loud in case it made it more wrong." He stopped. He said, "The doctor says everything looks fine." I closed my eyes. I said, "Thank God." He said, "I want to go to Boyd's house." I said, "No." He looked at me. I said, "Vivienne is handling this. You trust me." He looked at me for a moment longer, and in his face I could see the thing that was pulling against itself. The anger and the grief, and the love for his brother, and the rage at what had been done to his wife. And I watched him let the anger win for a moment. And then I watched him put it somewhere, and I was proud of him for that. He nodded. What Vivienne had been building, quietly, over the following weeks, was not a confrontation. It was a record. She had worked with Petra, gently and at Petra's own pace, to document the preceding 3 years in specific terms. Dates were known, incidents described plainly, the cumulative picture of what someone who had had access to this family had done with that access over a sustained period of time. A police report was filed the Monday after the incident. The officer who took Petra's statement was a woman who had clearly done this before, who asked questions in a sequence that made sense and did not ask questions that did not. Deanna was contacted by police 11 days later. I was not there, and I did not ask Boyd to describe it to me. What he told me sitting in my kitchen the week after, with his coffee going cold in front of him, was that she had been shocked. That was the word he used, shocked. As if the fact that something had consequences had not been part of her understanding of the situation she had created. She retained a lawyer. The lawyer sent a letter. Vivienne's colleague sent one back that was, by everyone's account, thorough in a way that communicated something specific, which was that the people on the other side of this had a great deal of documentation and no particular interest in settling anything quietly. The criminal matter proceeded on its own timeline, which is to say slowly and with many steps, but at the end of it, Deanna entered a plea that involved mandatory counseling, a period of supervised probation, and a formal no-contact order with respect to Petra. She did not go to jail. I know that will bother some people, and I want to say honestly that it bothered me too. In the small hours of some mornings when I was lying in bed thinking about my daughter-in-law driving herself to my house in the dark, with a broken wrist because she did not want to make trouble. A no-contact order is not jail. It is not what I would have written if I had been the one writing the sentence. But it was not nothing, and Vivienne was not done. What Vivienne had found, in the course of following the thread the way she had been trained to follow threads, was a separate matter that had nothing to do with Petra and everything to do with Deanna's professional life. Deanna worked in development for a private school, the kind of job that involved managing donor relationships and coordinating the allocation of restricted gift funds. Vivienne had a colleague who had a contact in the financial oversight community in her state, and the question she had put to that contact was a simple one. What does a pattern of financial irregularities look like when it involves restricted charitable funds and the single point of control? The answer, as it turned out, looked like something very specific, and the records that were ultimately produced in response to a civil subpoena looked a great deal like that specific thing. I did not know about this until Vivienne told me, 6 months after the night Petra came to my door. She said, "There is something you should know." I said, "How long have you known?" She said, "I had a suspicion for about 8 months before any of this happened. I did not have documentation." I said, "And now?" She said, "Now there's documentation. The school's board of directors addressed the matter internally and then externally. Deanna's employment ended. A separate proceeding followed, the details of which I will not walk through because some of it is still pending and some of it does not belong to me to tell. What I will say is that the thing Vivienne had held until the right moment had been held with purpose." I said, "Vivienne, why didn't you ever say anything before?" She said, "What would saying something have done, Nora?" That is my name, Nora. I am 64 years old, and she is right that saying something earlier would not have done anything useful except warn the wrong people and lose the thread. Boyd is still my son. He is going through something hard, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. He did not know about the financial matter. I believe that. He has spent the last several months in what I can only describe as a sustained confrontation with his own choices, the ways he looked away, the times Petra said something and he did not fully hear it, the years he spent finding reasons for things that did not have good reasons. He comes to my house on Sunday afternoons, and we sit in the kitchen and he is working on it, and I love him, and I am not going to abandon him to it. Finn and Petra are in the house they have been in for 3 years. In February, Petra called me on a Tuesday evening and she said, "Nan, it's a girl." She said it the way she says most important things, quietly, like the words needed to be placed carefully to land right. I cried. I am not someone who cries easily. I cried standing in my kitchen holding a fishing lure. I had been sorting when the phone rang. I got to the hospital on a Thursday in June at 5 in the morning, and I waited in those plastic chairs, and I thought about my husband who has been gone now for 12 years, and who would have been the kind of grandfather who rebuilt things with small hands, who told long stories at the dinner table, who would have cried just as I cried when he met this child. When the nurse brought her to me in the hallway while Finn was with Petra, I stood at the window with this new person in my arms, and she looked up at me with the unfocused gravity of someone who has just arrived from a very long way away and is taking a moment to assess the situation. Her name is Willa, 5 pounds, 14 ounces. Born on a Thursday in June with her mother's mouth and her father's ears, and a particular expression that I am choosing to believe she inherited from the great-uncle Gene she will never meet. That look of calm, considered attention, as if she already understands that most of what matters is right here in front of her, and she is not planning to miss any of it. Deanna was not present. She has not been present in anything in this family since the no-contact order was put in place, and the months that followed finished the rest. Boyd is finding his way. It is slow. I think he will get there. I go to Finn and Petra's house every Sunday now. I hold Willow while Petra eats her breakfast with both hands. I watch Finn, watch his daughter the way new fathers do, with that specific expression that is equal parts wonder and terror, and something so close to gratitude it has no other name. I drive home on Sunday evenings, and I sort fishing lures sometimes, and sometimes I just sit in the kitchen in the quiet, and I let it be enough, because it is. I have been turning over something for months now, something I want to say plainly because I think it is the most important thing I have learned in 64 years. I smoothed things for too long. I told myself it was grace, and it was not grace. It was avoidance wearing Grace's clothes. Real grace is not the absence of conflict. Real grace is what you choose to do when conflict is unavoidable, how you carry it, who you protect, how you hold the truth when someone else would rather you set it down. When someone walks into your family and treats the people you love as if they do not matter, you have a choice. You can absorb it and call that peace, or you can document it and call that truth. And truth, properly kept and carefully carried, does not need to shout. It does not need to threaten. It simply needs to be there, waiting until the moment it is needed. And then you go home. You sort the fishing lures. You wait for Sunday. You hold the baby in the morning light, and you let that be the thing you carry forward, because it is more than enough. It is everything. I have been sitting with something for a long time now, longer than I have admitted to anyone, and I think the most honest thing I can do is just say it plainly. I knew. Not the full shape of it, not the details, not what that particular evening in October would look like. But I knew something was wrong, and I had known for years, and I had made a choice, over and over, to call it grace when it was not grace at all. It was convenience. It was the path that cost me the least in the short term, and every time I smoothed something over, I was making a small deposit into an account that Petra was going to have to pay out of someday. That is the part that stays with me. The harm did not only come from Deanna. Some of it, a quieter and slower kind, came from the years I spent looking away. What changed things was not anger. I want to be clear about that, because I think people sometimes watch a story like this and they believe the turning point was rage, that someone finally got mad enough to act. That is not what happened. What happened was that Petra drove herself to my house with a fractured wrist because somewhere in her fear, she had decided I was a safe place to go. That kind of trust is not something you earn once. You either deserve it or you don't. And that night I understood with complete clarity that I had been making myself slightly less deserving of it for years by staying comfortable. Vivienne did not react with noise. She reacted with precision. She asked the right questions in the right order. She followed the thread all the way to the end, even when the end turned out to be somewhere she had not been asked to look. That is what it means to be genuinely sharp, not clever in the moment, but disciplined over time, willing to do the slow work of understanding a situation completely before you move inside it. I have always admired that in her. I understand it better now than I ever have. And Petra, what she had in that moment and what she had in every hard moment in the 3 years before it, was a kind of endurance that does not announce itself. She was not loud about what she was carrying. She taught her third graders, and she made soup when Finn was away, and she drove 20 minutes in the dark with a broken wrist because she did not want to be a burden. That is not weakness. That is a particular kind of strength that gets mistaken for passivity by people who have never had to sustain it. I am 64 years old, and I have learned that these 3 things, knowing right from wrong and acting on that knowledge, even when it is expensive, thinking clearly and patiently when everything in you wants to react, and holding yourself together through a long difficulty without losing your shape, these are not qualities people are simply born with. They are built. They are built in kitchens at 2 in the morning and in hospital hallways and in the quiet, sustained decision to keep going when going is hard. Willa is 4 months old now. I held her last Sunday in the morning light coming through the window, and she looked up at me with that specific expression she has, that careful attending. And I thought about everything that had to happen for her to be here, and for that room to be safe, and for that light to feel the way it felt. It was enough. It was more than enough.